In the video about components, I have mentioned that components are reusable. So you can create a component that returns any JSX you want to and include it any part of your application. For example, let's say we need to reuse greet component. All you need to do is uncomment this code, and let's say if I want to reuse greet 2 times, so I'll just paste it the greet tag 2 times below the greet tag. Once I'll save and look at the browser, I can see text hello money 3 times. Now this isn't really helpful, is it? What would be great if we could pass in the name of the person we want to greet. That way, reusing the same component, we could greet 3 different people instead of greeting money 3 times. That is where props comes into the picture. Props, short for properties, is the optional input that your component can accept. It also allows the component to be dynamic. Let's understand how props works in this video. Our intention here is to pass a name from app component to greet component and render that name in the browser. To specify props for a component, we specify them as a attribute. We simply add the name attribute over here and assign the value. Let's go with the name Bruce. Once I'll save and look at the browser, nothing's gonna change. I'll tell you why in later. Identically, let's name it Clark, and over here name equal to curly brace Diana. So we have specified the name property. We simply add the name attribute to the attribute and assign the value. But how do we retrieve these values in greet component? That is a quick two-step process. The first step, add a parameter to functional component. You are going to call it as props. So over here, props. You can actually name this anything you want to, but the convention is to name it props, and I highly recommend you don't deviate from this. The second step is to use this parameter in the function body. Now in the function body, let me first log the props parameter in the console.log props and props. Once I'll save this, again the necessity of curly brace and the return keyword is an ES6 arrow function concept. If you are struggling to understand, please read up on arrow functions and then continue. Alright, so if you go back to the browser and open the DevTools, you can see we have an object has an property called name and a value is Bruce. Similarly, if we'll see other object, we have Clark and Diana. So props is just an object that contains the attributes and their values which have been passed from the parent component. So if you want to display the name that has been passed to the greet component, we need to use props.name. So back in VS Code, and I'll replace money with props.name. Once I'll save and take a look at the browser, the output is not quite what we want it to be, and that is because it is being treated as text. We need to instead ask React to evaluate the JSX expression, and we do that by wrapping the expression with curly brace. So I'll wrap props.name with curly brace. The curly braces is a feature of JSX which is really helpful and is used a lot in React applications. If we now take a look at the browser, we can see hello Bruce, hello Clark and hello Diana. The reusability of components makes much more sense now that we are understood props. Each component can have an HTML template and we can pass it the data we want the component to use. Now let's add another prop to make sure we get a good understanding of how it works. I am going to add a second attribute over here, such as, let's call it hero name equals to, I'll call it Batman. Similarly, for Clark, I'm going to call it Superman, and for Diana, I am going to call Wonder Woman. And I have saved it. Now in the greet component, I am going to modify the h1 tag to hello props.name, and over here aka props.hero name, and I'll suggest you to pause a video over here and guess the output. So I hope you have paused the video and after that guessing the output you are continuing to watch. So output will gonna be hello Bruce aka, oh we have a typo here, so let's correct it, it's Batman. Hello Bruce aka Batman, hello Clark aka Superman, hello Diana aka Wonder Woman. Sometimes it is also possible that you might not have an idea as to what content is being passed in, but we want the component to render that unknown content. We can do that by specifying the content between the opening and closing tag of the component and retrieving it using the reserved children property in the props object. Let's understand better with an example. On the first greet component, instead of self-closing tag, I will split it into opening and closing tag. In between the tags, I will specify a simple p tag, and this will going to be passed in a children props. In this p tag, I'll write this is children props and save it. Now in the greet component we can render the paragraph using props.children. So first I am going to be adding parentheses over here and over here. As I will be splitting the JSX into multiple lines, the first line is the h1 tag and then curly braces, and I will add props.children over here. If I save the file and take a look at the browser, you can see that we have an error. This is because the JSX should contain only one wrapper element. So back in VS Code, we are going to wrap both these elements within the div tag. And once I'll save this and go back to browser, the error has gone. So currently this is the limitation, we can return only one HTML element, so we have to enclose all our content in one div wrapper tag. And once I'll go back to browser to elaborate our changes, we have additional content being rendered over here. This is children props. This paragraph corresponds to the inner HTML of the greet component, this right here. So if I were to add a button tag to the second greet component, I'll just make self closing tag to opening and closing tag again, and over here I'll just add button. Once I'll save this and look at the browser, you can see button is rendered over here. As we haven't given any name of it, let's call it button. Once I'll save this, the text will gonna be appear over here. So for the properties you know for sure are going to be passed, you can pass them as attributes. If you have no clue what is going to be passed as props, or if you have to pass in dynamic HTML content, pass it in between the component tags, and in component definition simply render the content using props.children. If something is specified, it is rendered in the browser, and if nothing is passed to props.children, it will not render anything. So that's it for this video. In the next video we are going to see the same props in the class components.